The topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
Welcome to the Fine to Fab Show with Lisa Lieberman-Wang, helping women reclaim their inner peace and power, going from feeling fine to being fab, fabulous, awesome, beautiful, serving to empower you to break through the barriers that weigh you down, to live an authentic life that is healthy, happy, and free. Now, here's Lisa.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here and more excited that we have this fabulous guest that will be joining us in a moment. Your trusted guide on your journey from fine to fab. I want you to know that our show is committed to helping you break through the barriers to live an even more authentic life that is happy, healthy, and free. And know that we are not just the show. We have a whole community joining us on a daily basis where you can be part of that too, just by coming on to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and liking or following Lisa Lieberman-Wang, and of course visiting our site at www.finetofab.com or www.lisaliebermanwang.com. We do have a live show here, so if you'd like to be able to call in, you can call in at 561-422-4365 or Skype in at W4WN Radio. So with no further ado, I wanted just to introduce you to my guest. And I am so excited because he's not just our guest. I consider him a very dear friend. And I loved what Glenn had to offer because he's been out in the field for years helping people. And he has been a trainer, a coach, an entrepreneur, and a top money earner in different industries that he's pursued from an earlier age, and the influence he's had over people over the past even decade has been astronomical. And what I love about Glenn's story is he really has one of success, but what people don't know is the inner struggles and the stresses we put on ourselves and what it does and how to overcome it. And here is a masterful gentleman to do that. And Glenn, are you there? Glen Crawford.
I am here, Lisa. Thank you for that great introduction. How are you hearing me today? Am I coming through okay?
You're coming through great. We're excited to have you here, and I love the topic. We're going to be talking about the stress triad and really how things affect us. But before I do, people don't realize we had met through the Tony Robbins World through our Platinum Partner Program. And it was very funny because we had it wasn't even during the trainings, it was on a social note. We were at a party and just from the very beginning we hit it off. So it was very interesting to see that what I saw then is not even the story I came to know more about you. And it just goes to show how what we put on the outside is not always what's on the inside.
Very rarely is it ever. It's, I think... one of the first things I learned back when I was I used to have a sales training consulting company, but, before I got into that was fake it till you make it, So a lot of people do go through life putting on a front and they create an outer shell, but that's really not an indication of what's going on inside them. And, that's why I love the work that you're doing, not just with this show, but also with the book and everything you do in your programs. It just speaks very true to me. From all the struggles that I've been through, to get to where I am. And that's just really what's given me the passion to try to get back and give back to other people and really just let them know that they're not out there by themselves. I know when you're going through it, it certainly feels like you're all alone. But when you're on the other side, the thing that's there on the other side is just absolutely amazing. It kind of reminds me of I think it was the old Richard Gere movie. It was one of my favorite movies when I was young, where he wouldn't finish the obstacle course until he brought the girl over. She couldn't get over the wall, and he stopped, and he ended up, I think, losing or doing something because he was ahead, and he ended up pulling her over. And it's just that whole theory in the armed forces and in life in general is, no man or woman left behind. And I just think it's a great way to live.
It is. And, you know, I'd love to have our listeners have a little bit about your background so they fully understand where you're coming from and some of the things you had to overcome that's put you in the position to even serve people today. So would you mind sharing some of that with us?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of where do you start? So, you know, I think maybe I'll start with the bad, the other side of the coin, you know, not necessarily where I am today, because if you saw where I was today, you know, it's not a real clear indication of where I came from. So, you know, I'm not going to give you my whole life story, but I'll probably try to rewind about a decade or a little bit better than a decade. And just to give you an idea, I'm going to be 40 this year, so we're just about going on 30. I was in business for myself at that point. I've been married now. This is my 10-year anniversary that we're getting ready to celebrate this month. So just about when I got married, and in the first couple of years of that, I had some major struggles. And, you know, I don't even know if you and I really got into all the details of the struggles, but I'll just kind of give you, you know, the capsule that sticks out to me. Number one, I was 285 pounds at my worst. Just to give you some contrast, right now I'm about 220. And so, you know, about 60 to 70 pounds over where I am right now. But
That's a lot.
not only was I overweight, the symptoms that came along with me being overweight were chronic pain, chronic back pain especially. That was one of the areas that was really bad for me, and that's gotten really bad over the years. And now I've corrected that where I'm actually pain free. But more so than the pain that I was having in my back was other things that came along with it. Like I had real high cholesterol, real high blood pressure. I had sleep apnea. I had chronic fatigue. I had chronic headaches, chronic anxiety. And essentially what had happened to me was I got to a point where about a couple of years into that, so a little sooner than a decade ago, about I would say probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I got to a point where I had reached just my worst point. And I went to just a general practitioner because I was starting to explore the sleep avenue because the headaches were getting so bad. And he just frankly looked at me and he said, you know, you're early 30s. He's like, look, man, he's like, you know, you're strong because I worked out in the gym. It's not that I didn't work out, but my version of a workout was, you know, if you break a sweat, you got to sit down. So
It might have been related
yeah,
for me
I mean,
back
it wasn't
then.
like cardio. I wasn't exercising. I was working out, you know, strength building, you know, so I kind of looked like a bouncer or a wrestler. And he just looked at me. He said, look, you're going to be the strongest guy in the graveyard in about 10 years. And
Wow.
actually, interestingly enough, I haven't told that story in a while, but I'm right about, you know, almost 10 years from when he gave me that prescription that I would basically, I wouldn't make it 10 years. But that was kind of the seed that grew into, you know, me having to change my life around. I mean, and there's other things that came along with it, other signs, but that was the wake up call that I really needed, was this, you know, this doctor basically telling me I'm going to die. So that's the bad side of the coin. So you want to expand on that or ask me anything additional about that part?
You know, it's funny. I think one of the things that come to mind is how do we get there? Like, how did you get there to the point of grossly overweight? That would be considered obese in today's standards. Anything more than, you know, 30% body mass of weight is overweight. So what actually led to even that lifestyle to not be taking care of yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I've thought about that a lot, and you know, I don't know that there's always one path to that truth of how do you get to that point or how do you get away from that point. I mean, there's multiple ways to get there and multiple ways to get out. But for me, as I got into my adult life and I started to work, like when I was younger, you know, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, I could show you pictures. I mean, I was bodybuilding, I was modeling, you know, I was doing all sorts of different stuff. I mean, I was trying to get in sports magazines. You know, I was actually doing bodybuilding competitions. And then once I got into, the adult life where I, felt I had to go out and make a living or responsibility, I started in sales. And my path was through the automotive industry. And when I was in the automotive industry, as you may or may not know, or the listeners may or may not know, the automotive industry calls for long hours, not unlike most, sales or other positions. And so I found myself, I actually ended up getting a job. It was about an hour away from my home. And I worked 12 to 14 hours a day. So, I mean, we're talking, 14, 15-hour days. And when you're there and you're not really strategizing on what your food is going to be, essentially you start going down the path of drinking a lot of coffee to stay alert and awake, and basically eating takeout food over the course of the day because you're so obsessed with doing a good job for, the position that you're carrying. And I think that that's where sort of the bad habits picked up. But additionally, what else happened to me is not only was I eating bad, but because of the long hours, I stopped training the way that I was training. So, I stopped exercising and started eating worse. So not to make it sound too simple, but I mean, if you really start to think about it, that's where it was.
And it can be that simple, though. Some people think it has to be some kind of a complicated story or anything else. It can be that simple of bad habits, of just circumstances and not making the time. So it can be.
Yeah, and I mean, it really, I think it was. I mean, that was the beginning of the habit. But a habit's like a warm, soft bed. It's, it's easy to get into and very hard to get out of. So, creating the habit was simple. I mean, go get a cheesesteak, eat a pizza. It tastes really good, and you might not feel great, an hour or half hour afterwards, but it certainly tastes good and it solves your issues in the moment. But for me, it got a little bit worse. And this is the part where you and I really haven't talked too much about, but I picked up a pretty decent drug and alcohol problem in my late 20s, added on to the obesity. It was obesity. I mean, I was up and down. And see, the problem is, and this is where I ultimately want to get to with this, is, after we talk a little bit, is I went through that pattern that most people go through where I would gain a little bit of weight and then I would lose a little bit of weight, and then I would gain weight, lose weight, gain weight, lose weight. So I was constantly in that yo-yo, and as I did that, because of the other chemicals that I was putting in my body, like the caffeine from the coffee and obviously the toxins from the drugs and alcohol and really, all the processed food that I was eating, I just started to accumulate so many toxins throughout my body that it really became very, very difficult for me to lose and keep the weight off. It was more, I found, than just making the emotional decision to lose the weight because, my willpower was actually pretty decent. But the problem was I started to get good at dieting and not good at changing my lifestyle. Does that make sense?
Right. So the food was, but there was no exercise, there wasn't other things, or even it might not have been giving you the same response as you got the first time, the second, third, fourth.
Yeah, well, and that's with any chemical addiction, whether it's drugs, alcohol, food. That burger's never going to taste the same as it did the first time, just like, not that I've done it, but from what I understand, just like the first hit of heroin is never the same after you do it again. So you're always chasing that high, and that's because we have such a strong release of dopamine the first time we experience something, and then our brains are actually chemically telling us to get that back, which is why typically, I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago. It's a great article actually about cheeseburgers, which made me think of that when you said that, where they were showing the brain and what it does to actually get you satisfied is you're not getting necessarily satisfied off the taste anymore, even though the taste is maybe what released the dopamine in the first place. You actually have to now do it by adding more food in. So instead of eating one burger, it's like kind of eating to fill that like hole. You need more food in order to do that, to get that same chemical release, just like drugs, where you're constantly adding on. And that was the addiction I had with mine was pills, where it started off 1 or 2 pills was fine. By the time I reached the peak of my drug habit, I needed 8 or 9 Percocets to get the same high as I got from one. And that's what happens with our brain, whether it's with food, with emotions, or with a chemical addiction.
Absolutely. And speaking from someone who myself used to have an addiction with food, and I was obviously a compulsive overeater, emotional eater, binge eater, bulimic, you name it. There's also a lot of things you were talking toxins, and I want to go there, is a lot of the food today is laced with so many preservatives and stuff in there, and the manufacturers actually have been putting things in our food that also cause you to want more. And the best example is, they say Lay's potato chips, you can't just have one. And there's literally a reason chemically why you can. Some of the fats that they put in there make it so that once you have that one, it gives you that insatiable appetite that you need more to feel satisfied. So there is a chemical, not even just within your own body, but that even ingested sometimes, that causes to set off triggers that makes us do things. So there's a lot of different interaction here that you're touching on, and I'm sure we can go into a whole different conversation with our background.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about addictions, it's kind of a special area for me because I've really wandered into so many. I always say I'm an equal opportunity addict. I mean, I've tried addictions to just about everything, not to make light of it, but I've been through a lot of different addictions. And, I just want to, before we get into the chemicals, I do want to give you the other side of the coin. I mean, I don't want to just paint this bad picture here of, this, overweight, obese, tired. Actually, the second, I just want to touch on this because there might be some people out there, females and males, a lot of people don't understand sleep apnea. And so I just want to touch on sleep apnea because this was actually the first doctor conversation was probably the turning point. But then I went to, I was exploring. I was trying to lose weight. I was doing all these things, and I went to a specialist where they test you for sleep apnea because the headaches. I would literally sleep with Excedrin next to my bed, and then I would pop two Excedrin as soon as I woke up. And then I would drink coffee because I was under the impression that the black coffee did cure my headaches. Excedrin, black coffee, and a hot shower was kind of my fix. Not to say that that's a healthy fix. Now I know a lot better, but that's what I used to do. And so I was trying to solve the sleep pattern issue, and I went to a doctor. They put me in a lab overnight where they wire you up. And essentially once the results came back, I went back into the sleep doctor, and when we sat down, he said, because this was when I was at the peak, I was like 270 to 280, and he said, the only way to cure your sleep apnea is if we gut you. Basically, they wanted to cut and open up my esophagus so that I could breathe at night, because what happens is when you sleep at night, anybody that snores that's out there that's listening to this is what I've learned about this particular issue, because I did study it after this guy told me this, is when you go into that deepest sleep, which is where you're rebuilding, it's S4, it's when your deepest level of sleep. When you go into the deepest level of sleep, essentially what happens is all your muscle, like everything kind of shuts down and gets like limp. Almost like if you were going to go pick up a little kid, like a baby, like I picture picking up one of my little kids, if they were sleeping, their head's hanging down, their legs are totally limp. That's usually because kids get so much more S4 sleep, deep sleep, than adults. They're sleeping like that most of the night, whereas adults, we get maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours now. The problem is once we start to go into that S4 sleep, what happens is our esophagus gets really lazy and the muscles kind of just flatten out. Well, if you're overweight, even just a little bit, it could actually cause snoring. So snoring sounds funny and a lot of people don't talk about it. It's like it's annoying. But what ultimately happens is you're basically sawing away at your esophagus and your heart. And so when they looked at me after the sleep study, he said my heart was so bad and my throat was so bad that, again, the backup what the other doctor said, he's like, the only way you're going to make it is if we give you the surgery where they basically fillet you like a fish and they open up your esophagus. And when he showed me pictures of what they do, I mean, I remember this as clear as day. I looked at the doctor. I said, no. I'm like, I'll go lose 80 pounds. then we'll talk about whether or not this is the only option. Like, it can't possibly be that way. It can't possibly be that that is the only option. Once I lose the 80 pounds, if I still have it, we'll talk about surgery. But, you know, the point with sleep apnea is that was one of the I mean, if besides the weight caused the sleep apnea, because I did kick the sleep apnea once I lost the weight, but that's what was causing the high blood pressure. That's what was causing the chronic fatigue, the chronic headaches. So don't make light of somebody snoring. I guess that's kind of the moral of that part of the story.
Right. And I've seen it too a lot because we have family members that have the machines and the CPAPs and all the other stuff. And I always go back to, if you lost the weight, this would be one of the solutions to many other variables there that would make this not a problem. And a lot of people are looking for the remedy but not willing to do the work, which will be a lifelong remedy versus a pill or drug or a machine that's going to make us okay. So that's incredible. I never heard about anything with the surgery. That part was definitely new to me, but I know the sleep apnea is such a common thing today, and even sleep apnea means you can die in your sleep if you are not breathing. People might not even realize the extremity of why your doctor said that. So losing the weight was a big deal, and you obviously seen there was a pattern. I want to go back to one thing. I always say that, you know, most of the time when we take something off our plate, and my analogy with plate, because it's always been about food, when you take something off your plate, you always put something back on it. And I chose the good girl disease, so I never did drug or alcohol. Instead, I used food, and when it wasn't food, it could have been spending. When it wasn't spending, it could have been work. You know, it was always finding something to just keep me busy or doing something, and to make me feel okay. But what was your turning point? You know, like you went to the doctor, you walked out. Was that the turning point? Okay, I'm going to lose weight. That's it? Like, was that it? Or was there something else that you had to go through to actually make that decision to change everything?
Yeah, I mean, those two doctor's visits were pretty bad for me. I mean, I think, you know, Tony talks a lot about leverage, and I believe in leverage as well. And, you know, I mean, at that point, you know, you're hearing you have a decade to live by two different people, two different physicians. And, you know, you start looking at your newborn baby, and at that point I only had one, now I have three. And, you know, you start looking at your life and saying, I gotta solve this. So I think it was a combination of now not only making the decision, but really getting the leverage in my own mind of that, you know, why I was really going to do this. And then, you know, there's other stuff that was small. I mean, you know, I'd bend down to go tie my shoes, and I was literally like out of breath. It took me like 3 visits down to the shoe to tie the shoe. And, you know, and that's not, you know, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out like something's not right there. So, you know, there's a lot of little things, but I think that doctor's visit was really kind of my turning point to really getting out of that situation. I mean, it didn't happen overnight, but that was the decision was made, you know, right in or around that time, you know, with that information given to me.
See, and now what's really funny about that is knowing all that and coming from the bodybuilder world and the fact that, you know, being an exercise enthusiast to begin with, to think that wouldn't have been the overnight. Because for me, my decision when I stopped all that stuff was an immediate. It was just a decision. A decision to me means to put an end to any other option, and it seemed like it was overnight, at least when I made my shift. So
yeah, I'm a little slower. So, I mean, I am. You know, I mean, I think men in general need to. I teach this when I teach training. Is in general, men are a little thicker this way, where typically we need to hear or see something about 5 times before it really sinks in. And I would say that probably was about right when it came to really making a true decision. Like I'm not talking a yo-yo decision where I'm talking a true decision where this is never going to happen again, which is really what that was. It took about 5 different things coming together at the same time or around the same time where it just, you know, you just wake up one day and it's like, that's it, you know, I'm done. And,
you know, Glenn, I just got caught on the fact that men were thicker. I like that. I'm just going to tell you, being it was recorded, I'm excited to be able to use that as fact.
No, it's true. I mean, it happens with me and my wife all the time. I kid around. Like we have a running joke. Like we just replaced, our pots and pans with like these green, non-toxic pots and pans because I'm really studying the toxic thing. And they work better. They clean better. They cook better. And I'm always saying to her, next time I tell you to do something, the first time, just go do it, which of course is the joke because she's been telling me for about a year, hey, I want to get these pots and pans. I want to get these pots and pans. And I'm like, well, I'll study it. I'll research it. I'll look at it. And, it's just, we're thicker. I mean, we just, I guess it's probably like an ego thing, just like we won't ask for directions. And, we walk into a store and somebody says, can I help you? And we automatically say no. We're just conditioned to pound our chest and do things on our own, and we have to come to our own conclusions. And and it's just the truth. I mean, and I know from coaching men, you can't get a man you can't like convince him to make a decision. He's got to make his own decision, 100%, or he's not going to follow through with it.
It has to be his idea. And on that note, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more specifically about some of the lessons you learned that shaped your life. And I want to thank everybody, and stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
If you've always wanted someone to connect with on your path to a happy, healthy you, I've got great news. In her #1 best-selling book, Fine to Fab, 7 Secrets of a Successful Woman's Journey Away from Depression, Disordered Eating, and Self-Sabotage, Lisa Lieberman-Wang shares how you can experience your breakthrough just as she did. Start living an authentic life without blame, shame, or years of therapy. Buy now at finetofab.com.
Now that I have your attention, ladies, when you need help breaking through the barriers that weigh you down, turning to food is not going to help, and starving yourself along with ongoing feelings of helplessness and frustration will not help either. The cycle of self-sabotage, disordered eating, and stinkin' thinking has to stop, and there is no better way than with other smart, business-savvy women like you who are making the change with best-selling author, licensed master NLP practitioner, and trusted guide, Lisa Lieberman-Wang of Fine2Fab.com. Lisa will help you get that breakthrough you've been waiting for. Go to Fine2Fabshow.com right now for all the details of the life-changing 10-week transformational program and the special listeners promotion. It's time to turn your life from feeling fine to being fab. Fabulous, awesome, beautiful. Go to Fine2Fabshow.com now.
Back as I hear that echo again. Glenn, are you with me?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we have a great echo right now, so hopefully this gets corrected in a moment. We're going to be hopeful that they turn off something in the speakers, maybe in the engineer's office. So Glenn, we're going to see if we can deal with this if you're sharing and I'm not. So what are you were just talking, and I want you to share with me 3 things that you learned from your experience that have shaped your life today.
All right. Well, hopefully the echo is not on my end. I don't hear it as much on my end as yours, so hopefully we can get through it and we can correct it. But that's technical. There's always going to be some technical problems, so hopefully everybody can listen and get some good information out of this. But, I study. I've found that when I really look deep at something and unravel all the unknowingness, all the pieces that. Oh, now I'm echo on my end. So well, that is hard to deal with, at least. So
I know.
Now it's not so funny. So, when I get rid of the unknowingness, the things that I don't understand out of a subject, typically I found that by putting my focus concentration on that particular subject, ultimately I can work through almost any situation. I just, it's something else takes over. And so, one of the areas that I really started to study was the idea of stress. About a little bit better than a year ago, it was almost a year and a half ago, my uncle, who was my role model when I was growing up, died of cancer. And it was a real big wake-up call for me because I had gone through, I told you all the bad, but I didn't tell you the good. I mean, I've gone through so many things to get to a great weight, low 200s. I train every day. I've totally changed the way that I eat, kicked any habits that I had that were negative, drug or alcohol habits. So, I've really turned all those things around, and I've dedicated myself to not only that in my life, but also helping other people. But one of the things that really was a turning point for me as far as helping other people was I had really focused on myself for so long. And then when my uncle died, he was only 10 years older than me. So he had kind of gotten about the same prescription that I got, but unfortunately he couldn't get out from under it, or maybe he just didn't know how to get out from under it. And again, he was my role model when I was growing up. And I look at that and I say, look, I don't have necessarily the cure for cancer, and I'm hopefully they're coming up with something. But I think you can prevent a lot of these illnesses because most of them stem from stress. And so I really started to try to understand stress and how the brain operates along with the body. And what I found, and I don't want to overcomplicate this because I want to try to get it so people really understand it, but basically, everything stems around the brain and the spinal column. And so the brain essentially acts as a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week surveillance system over the body. And when we produce a thought in our brain, it actually starts physically as a electromagnetic pulse. It's like almost, if you could picture it on a very tiny, tiny level, it's like a little thunderstorm. And then basically what happens is neurons have to talk to neurons, so there's what's called a synaptic gap, and there's basically a lightning rod that goes from neuron to neuron. That's how neurons connect, or neurological, which is ultimately how a thought is started. Then our brain converts the thought or the electromagnetic pulse over to a chemical, and that's what's brought into our body. So what we feel, not what we think, not our logic part of our brain, but what we feel is actually truly a chemical reaction, not a electrical reaction. And so we get this chemical feeling in our body, and that's basically what stems from any of the emotions. So an emotion is your body's response system ultimately to this thought. And so what starts to develop internally first, before we have our external habits, is we start to develop, let's say, a desire or an excitement for something, trying something new. And so we get this feeling that happens inside our body. And then because our brain is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week surveillance system over our body, our brain essentially sees or senses what the feeling is that's being created in our body and starts to create like thoughts. So it doesn't have to be a thought pattern that would completely mirror what the feeling was or what the thought was that created the feeling in the first place. It just has to be a thought that would give you the same feeling back. And then ultimately what happens is we create a circle 8. And the circle 8 ultimately feeds back into the body, which feeds back into the brain, back to the body, back to the brain. And that's how we start to create chemical addictions, because, again, it is a chemical, even though your brain is producing it through thoughts. Does any of that make sense?
Part of it was the feedback I was getting too, Glenn, but give me an example of a thought that gets converted.
So, okay, let's say that, and this is when it really is something you have to monitor, is like when you're tired, So I know a lot of people, like I have a rebounder right by my bed. I try to immediately get up and rebound to get oxygen in my brain and wake my brain up. But let's say that you go through that process when you first wake up in the morning, where you're comfortable bed, And hypothetically, you're supposed to get out of bed at, let's say, 7 o'clock in the morning, but it's really comfy and really tired. And what's it really going to hurt if you sleep that extra 30 or 45 minutes? Essentially what you're doing is your brain, because you were tired, defenses were down, created a thought that gave an emotion of like that comfort to your body, which then fed back in your brain and then back in your body. It's like a loop. And so your body essentially starts to take over your brain, especially when you're tired, and ultimately kind of take control. And so you're not really thinking with your brain, you're actually thinking with your body based on a snap thought that might have came in that wasn't even something that you were monitoring. And so you end up sleeping over a little bit more than what you should have slept, and then your day starts out bad because you're a half hour, 45 minutes behind, and you're constantly in this rush, and you're saying, why did I do that? I said I wanted to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning for a reason, and I let myself down. I broke that promise to myself. But essentially what had happened was your body ran your brain in that particular situation and fed back thoughts to your brain. Does that kind of make sense?
That's awesome. That's a great way to explain it, and I think that would be something easy for people to understand. Sure.
Yeah, and so it gets a little worse from here. So now that I have that, let's say base of understanding, here's the next conclusion that my research turned up, is that stress, remember what I started out by saying is stress is essentially the beginning stages of disease, right? All sorts of diseases, not just cancer. I mean, I'm not here to talk about specifically one disease or another, but I mean, it could be any disease, really. It all starts with your environment, your internal environment. And so the idea is that if your brain is overseeing your body, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week surveillance system, here was really what got me, is what I call the stress triad. And this is what we talked about. So essentially there's 3 points of stress. And one of the points would be your emotional stress, or your thinking, your belief systems. That would be your emotional stress. We would call that your mental capacity, right? So that's one. And obviously we all know that we can get in stressful situations. We can get, we're under the gun at work. We have a deadline. We're trying to jockey kids and finances and work and life. And, we're constantly under stress. The problem is that our brains were not designed to be in constant stress. We're designed to have short stress, like acute stress. I can have, it's the difference is acute and chronic. So acute is, there's a ruffling in the bushes when I walk outside and it's dark, and I kind of get that burst of energy and alertness. That's acute stress. It's going to wear off in 10 or 15 minutes because there really wasn't an issue. It was more like my defense mechanism. So that's like that kind of stress. But that doesn't really stay. Chronic stress stays, and that's an ongoing stress, and that's really where disease comes from. So if you look at the triad, one of these points is emotional. The other is physical. Physical being I'm in pain. Like I said, my back was bothering me. I'm talking bothering me. It was really in pain. Sometimes I'd be on my hands and knees just to get up and go to the bathroom. Or I hurt my leg or my arm, but I'm in some sort of physical pain. That would be the second point of the triad. And then the third point of the stress triad is environmental. And this is the one that's most overlooked, I think, which is environmental would be like toxins. So like you had made the point about when you eat processed food, you're taking in all these chemicals and toxins. I had made the point about alcohol. Drug use is toxins. Even aspirin is toxins. We can breathe in toxins with secondhand smoke, mold. Toxins really kind of come from everywhere. You can even drinking water, if it's not cleansed properly, can create toxins because you have microorganisms, heavy metals or chemicals coming into the water. So toxins come in all shapes and forms. So what happens is, and I want you to go back to the brain being the 24/7 surveillance system over the body, is your brain can't tell the difference between one stress or another. Meaning, if you're in physical pain, your brain, remember what I told you about, your brain is going to match with thought the feeling that's associated with your body. So if it can't tell the difference between one and another, and I'm in physical pain, then what happens is you start to create thoughts or emotions that match the feeling of pain or stress in your body. So if you get around people, like I'll give you an example, my mom, who hurt her knee really, really bad, had bad knee surgery, and there was a defect in what they used, and she was in chronic pain, and she sunk into a depression. So how were they linked? They were linked because her brain can't tell the difference between physical stress and mental stress. Same thing with environmental. Let's say I'm pain-free, and let's say emotionally I feel great, but I'm toxic. My brain can't tell the difference. And you know what happens is you go into a chronic stress state. And again, we're not designed to be in chronic stress. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and it becomes almost like muscle memory. We have an association or phantom pains. We go back to the same thing over and over again.
That's exactly right, and it's a great point. And so what I found is that in order to break free, like I look at freedom. I used to think of freedom was just emotion, and the more I started to understand this brain 24-hour, 7-day-a-week surveillance system pattern and what gets created and the body starts running the brain and how stress works and the difference between acute and chronic stress and then the stress triad, I realized that because there'd be points where I thought I felt really good and then all of a sudden I'd sink into a depression and then what do I do? What do I do when I get a little sad? I eat. I fall off the wagon, I drink, I do things that I know I shouldn't do, and then I get the guilt because I broke a promise to myself, and then what do I do from there? I do more of what I shouldn't do.
Right, you
so
go back into the old
I started
pattern.
to look at these patterns, and, I'll quite frank with you, I didn't study this stuff to teach it. I studied this stuff because this is what was going on with me. Even after I had lost the weight and gone through all that stuff, I still wanted to solve this issue. And so what I did is I started attacking it from all three perspectives. I spent a lot of time getting pain-free and understanding what the benefits of mobility, stretching, proper exercise, and regaining muscle strength in core muscle areas. I changed my philosophy on exercise away from weightlifting and trying to be big and huge and buff and, strong. Strong is good, but I wanted to be physically fit. Like kind of like a swimmer or a runner. I wanted to be in shape and I wanted my core to be strong because everything was revolving around my core. Everything stems from there. So that's really what I focused on to get myself, to be completely pain-free. And now I can say my core is actually one of the strongest parts of my body. Then I put my focus on, now I want to say then, I started with emotional. So I couldn't have got there if I didn't start with the emotional. It was emotional. Then for me, it was pain. Then the last part of the triad was this detoxification. And here's kind of the kicker, and I hope I can get this in and I'm not monopolizing this call because I don't want to do that. But what I learned was that all these toxins that I was storing inside my body, I knew this phrase a long time ago and I never understood it. But I used to repeat it even though I didn't totally understand it. People would say, we hold toxins in our fat cells are there to protect our internal organs And I never really asked from what. And I thought about it, and I'm like, well, what do fat cells protect your internal organs from? Because if you get shot or stabbed, it's not like fat cells are going to protect you from the knife or the gun. So I dug a little deeper, and what I found out was that essentially what fat cells are there for, the intelligence of our body is amazing. They're there to absorb all of these toxins and they store them inside the fat cells like glue or like tar. And so essentially what I learned later that I didn't understand when I first went through my diet, yo-yo, all that situation, is that the reason why I would lose weight, gain weight, and seemingly gain weight back so easy is because I wasn't actually flushing out the toxins, because I wasn't not only eliminating the toxins, but I wasn't eating foods that were toxic free, like pesticide free, organic, all that stuff. And so I was overwhelmed with toxins, and I could never beat on any of the problem areas, and I was constantly storing all these toxins. So it wasn't until I learned about how to flush the toxins out of the fat cells, that's when fat just started falling off, because once the toxins are gone, the fat cells essentially don't have a job. And now once you get rid of them, as long as you don't bring the toxins back in, there's no reason for your body to rebuild fat cells. And
now,
so,
Glenn, I'm going to actually have to stop you there, because I know next question is going to be, how do I do that? But because we have to end and the time went so quickly, I just want you to let people know what you're doing and how to reach you, and then we'll make sure your information's on the website.
Yeah, great. My web site, my coaching program is Welcome the Unknown, and the spin on Welcome is it's with a K, which I'm not going to get into why Welcome is spelled with a K now, because we're short on time. But it's welcometheunknown.com. That's my web address, and that's a great place to get me. If not, on Facebook, Glen, spelled with one N, Crawford, or you can look up Welcome the Unknown also on Facebook, and certainly get in touch with me via Facebook or through Lisa and the website. Any of those ways would be fine.
And I know you're going to be opening up a spa, and it's going to be centering around all the incredible information you're sharing with us. So we'll make sure that people can find you. And if you're in Jersey, they'll have to stop by and start their whole detoxification and wellness program with you. Glenn, I want to thank you for being my guest, and I absolutely love you, and I love the information we shared. And I apologize for the technical challenges. But for our listeners, know to continue to join us. Like me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn at Lisa Lieberman-Wang. Go to Find to Fab. Also, you can join the community by texting the keyword Find2Fab, FINETOFAB, to 90210. Hit send and be updated on all the new things we're doing, free tips and webinars. And we look forward to seeing you, hearing from you in the future. Remember, you're fab, fabulous, awesome, beautiful. Have a great day.
Feeling tired and achy? Frustrated with allergies? Stress causing you high blood pressure? If you're ready to feel better, have more energy, maintain healthy cholesterol levels, joint flexibility and circulation, looking to reduce inflammation, support healthy glucose levels and sinus relief, plus so much more, Isotonics OPC3 is a food supplement made from a combination of bilberry, grapeseed, red wine, and pine bark extracts, and citrus extract bioflavonoids, all found to be powerful antioxidants. Oligomeric proanthocyanins, OPCs, are bioflavonoids found in fruit, vegetables, and certain tree barks that provide exceptional nutritional benefits to the human body. Studies have shown OPCs to be up to 20 times more powerful than vitamin C and 50 times more powerful than vitamin E in neutralizing free radicals. Isotonics is delivered in an isotonic solution, which means that the body has less work to do in obtaining maximum absorption, as you can drink your vitamins. No pills, binders, or fillers. Buy now at www.amillionproducts.com. Isotonics OPC3.